right, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I've been able to have multiple conversations on this exact topic, and Riles didn't tell me what he thinks, but he said he has a concrete answer, like he's set. So it's going to be a good discussion because I'm set, and I know that what I'm going to say is probably not going to be his answer. Who is your best all around athlete? What sport do you think produces, or do you need to be the greatest all around athlete? Technicality, conditioning, just everything. I'm set in stone about this. Like I could be swayed to boxing. I think boxing is like probably one of the toughest sports in the world, but I think tennis players are the most fascinating athletes, and the talent on those individuals. Like, I don't know if you ever play tennis for fun in the summertime. It is so freaking hard. And like, I play golf, and like, golf is, I think, one of technically probably one of the hardest sports in the world. But like, the playing a tennis match for 3.5 hours
Mhm.
and that constant back and forth agility while you're crushing like 200-kilometer serves, while you're like, it's I can't even imagine. I think there's a lot of sports that deserve a lot of praise for these athletes, but tennis for me, man, is like the peak. Like
That's a good one, yeah.
that's an
Because
athlete.
these guys are big too,
Oh
and the
yeah.
girls. Like they're like you can't be like they're long and they're like some of the guys are like pretty like thick and strong, but they can move. Like that's a really good one. I guess the one. I mean, I guess athleticism, like that physicality component, but like that's I don't know. That would be like the only thing. But yeah, tennis is a really good one. Like yeah, golf is good. Like Formula One drivers, like
Oof.
their brains and the
Yeah.
technicality there. Like I always resort to like basketball
Yeah.
or football, like depending on the position. Like if you're like some of these tight ends or some of these like even like quarterbacks that can move and run
But even some of these
and
like left tackles or like defensive ends that
yeah,
run like 5 second, 40 like it's like
yeah,
that's a hard thing to do as well.
yeah. It was kind of a not a kick in the nuts the other day. Someone was talking to me about hockey and like if you could access equipment easier,
Yeah, JJ Watt said
if
this.
yeah, if the league would look different in terms of like the like it's obviously a white dominant
Yeah.
sport and like you have to be able to afford it. Like playing growing up is expensive. But then I was like, shit, like you're right. Like it's gonna be
Yeah.
like it'd be like LeBron James around going around on skates. Like that would be so scary.
Yeah. Or even JJ Watt. Like JJ Watt like
Yeah,
plays
JJ Watt, like
plays a bunch of
and
like shinny now, and he just came out and said like that's why soccer is the most, the
yeah.
most popular sport in the world. Like it's shoes and it's a ball. Whereas unfortunately
Mhm.
hockey, there is a lot of cost, and there is a lot of accessibility involved with hockey. And yeah, it's too bad because it is such a, I mean, we're biased obviously, but it is such an amazing sport. But it's wow, now that you put
You
that into
s-
my brain, like
you
imagine
see
going
some of
against
these.
LeBron.
Oh my god, it'd be terrifying. Like Jamie Alexiak is LeBron's
Yeah.
size.
Yeah.
Probably a little lighter but I think when I trained with Rick, he was like 260, close to 260,
Jeez Louise.
6'9". But like when he's out there, you're like, this guy's huge. And like he's thick and like he's intimidating out there. So it'd be all guys like that. That wouldn't be fun. But like
Yeah.
you see these guys playing multiple sports, like when they were in high school or whatever, and you're just like, whatever they touch, they would have been successful
It's
in.
gold. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
My
anyways, we just wanted to start off with a little fun. We have a very special guest today. This is the Speak Your Mind podcast, and my name is Tyler Smith, and joined with me from Switzerland is Riley Shand. This episode is always powered by TorchPro, our amazing team at TorchPro, and we are presenting to you today Canadian royalty, an icon, one of the greatest minds I've ever experienced, Ron MacLean. Now, Ron MacLean, to many, especially in the Canadian world, is you just know Ron MacLean. Obviously, it used to be Ron and Don, but now it is, Ron is still doing his thing on Hockey Night in Canada. And it's Yeah, I'm so fortunate and blessed to be able to call Ron a friend and to be able to, you know, just check in with Ron. And I mean, I've spent multiple weekends with Ron now, and to see the way he just is Ron, he is a robot, like in the best way possible. It is so neat to be able to see the way his mind is constantly working and to see the connections he can make to the stories that he's been a part of. And we'll experience that a little bit in the episode here, but just his knowledge of, the book world, the indigenous tradition world, just all of these worlds, and the fact that he is the epitome of what it means to be present, and he is always present. And I always enjoy chatting with Ron, and it was it was a pleasure to have a Canadian icon on, and somebody who is, I know, with us, like, he has been an integral part of the love and support we received, and always being there for us. So it was it was amazing.
Yeah, no, he's good. I think like as the hockey voice and as hockey players growing up, like hearing his voice just reminds me of watching Leaf games as a kid. Yeah, no, he was amazing. Like you said, like so wise, so like versatile, like so much information is stored in his brain, and he's able to talk about different things, and it's really really cool. But the thing I like most is just like when you're talking, like you just really feel like he's listening, and that's just a really great trait to have. So yeah, we had a blast with it. It's a good one. So we hope you enjoy, and we'll see you soon.
And as always, Riles has been hot on the Tune Tuesdays, which I hate. So go on over to our Speak Your Mind Instagram and check it out, because it's always a blast to create some fun little content, including our new Tune Tuesdays. And hopefully it's a breath of fresh air for you guys watching and listening as well. So please enjoy our boy Ron MacLean, and we love you all. Well, Ron, how are you?
Tyler, it's a pleasure to see you again. You were in the Hockey Night in Canada studios a month ago and had the experience of what we eat for dinner each night before the game. So that had to be a real thrill for you. And hi, Riley. It's nice to see you too. And you share the roots of a lot of my upbringing in refereeing down with the Falcons and St. Catharines, and
Nice.
so many experiences, because I lived in Ancaster, Ontario. For folks who don't know, that's about an hour and a half west of Toronto and just about an hour north of St. Catharines, where Riley's from, and refereed all through what they call the Golden Horseshoe of Ontario, and cut my teeth in some of the coldest rinks outside of those in Red Deer, Alberta, where I grew up.
Some of the people that ask me where I played juniors, like before I went to college, I tell them the Greater Ontario Junior Hockey League,
Yeah.
but the Golden Horseshoe Junior Hockey League, which is part of the Greater, and they're like, what, is this league for real? Like, this can't be the name of it.
It's a great name. If you can make the Golden Horseshoe, chances are you're going to the show.
Yeah. And then they see my jersey hanging out. I remember I brought my St. Catharines Falcons jersey to my college dorm room and hung it up on the wall with like a hockey stick, and they're like the candy cane shoulders. I don't know if you remember those.
Gosh, yes, I love them.
Red and white all the way down the arm.
Beautiful sweaters.
My gosh.
Yeah, one of the most elegant sweaters in all of hockey, to be truthful. And I also remember, since we focus a bit on mental health in this, I remember I used to referee, as I say, and I was doing a game in St. Catharines, and the coach wasn't Bilby, who's there now, who's a great friend of Paul Bissonnette's. It was another coach, and he was mad at his team. And in order to get at them, he changed his goalie every shift. I've never seen this, and I didn't really know how to stop it. It was definitely bullying to the nth, and I was very upset for the two goalies who had to go in and out, in and out, in and out. All this started late in the first and went on for 2 periods, and me, referee, failed to deal with that, I can tell you.
There were some eye-opening tactics in that league. Even when I played, like I got called up when I was 15, 14 maybe. And I was playing with all these guys at that time, like 20 years old. That age difference was just crazy.
That's right.
And I remember, like, for the Sutherland Cup, I was just kind of sitting on the bench, and I'd go out every once in a while. But like before the game, I remember the Niagara Falls coach put a set of golf clubs out right at the center of our ice, and like we walk out there to a set of golf clubs.
Brilliant.
And then like just little things, like little stones, pebbles in like the locker room, so guys are
Yep.
stepping on all these little pebbles as they walk out onto the ice and jacking up the heat in the room. I don't know if you remember the old memorial in
Oh,
Niagara Falls, but
yes. And even, was it
yeah,
Sanford and St. Catharines, or is that Niagara?
that was Niagara
That's
Falls. Yeah,
Niagara. That was a
Sanford.
super cold rink. And I'll tell you another memory I have of doing that loop is I was in Fort Erie one night, and you mentioned the age disparity. So that's always a big thing if there's a fight. Because how do
Yeah,
I know as a referee that a 21-year-old isn't, giving it to a 15-year-old? And this is what happened this night. I'm head referee, and I had two linesmen, Steve Stasiak and Rob Hooper, and the fight happens, and it's a 20-year-old and a just turned 16. So the coach of Fort Erie is really upset that there's 16-year-olds getting filled in. So mad that he reaches over the boards and grabs the linesman, Rob Hooper, and shakes him and says, "Do you not know what's happening here?" And I said,
oh
"Tony
no.
Manera," I said, "Tony, you're out of the game." The coach. And he says, "Well, I'm not leaving, Ron." And I thought, oh, I've never had that either. I think I threw two coaches out in my 23 years of refereeing, but I didn't know what to do again. And I'm sort of looking
Yeah,
at Tony and you see, what do you mean you're not leaving? You have a game misconduct. You can't grab their linesman. You know that, Tony. And he says, "Well, I'm not leaving." And I finally reasoned with him, and he was a kind heart who cut me some slack, because otherwise I was going to have to forfeit the game, right? And we'd all go home. And
yeah,
it's just like, oh, brother. A lot of moments like
yeah.
that. Penalty shots in
Character
Port
building.
Colborne. Yes, very much so. Best highlights of my there was a guy in Fort Erie, no, Port Colborne, used to sing the anthem. He had to be 95, and he would come out with his get the key or the note or whatever it is that you need to start "O Canada," and so many fond memories of that. But St. Catharines, your team, that was so. Did you win the Sutherland Cup?
No, the year I got called up, they lost. I think Cambridge maybe won it. It was Cambridge, Strathroy, and us. And then the years I was there, we ended up losing the playoffs. And then they won shortly after I left with a lot of the same guys on the team. And I remember coming back from college and going to the games and stuff. And it was pretty crazy atmosphere. St. Catharines is a really good
Oh,
hockey city.
Tyler Bealby is their coach now, and yeah, they run a fantastic program. So if your child is invited to go to the Falcons, say yes.
Well, we're gonna move it out west, and Ron, I wore a special shirt. You missed the tournament this year, but the boys of summer. So put on your calendar, July 7th to 9th, if you're interested. Yeah, I want to even just bring up that. I mean, growing up in Red Deer, and then even just I told Riley as soon as we started, I was like, I sent Ron a text, just kind of on a whim, and just wanted to see if there was a response even. And instantly you were like, yeah, I'll be there. I got a friend in Red Deer I got to see. And I know we still talk about it a ton, but just that, like, what was that like for you? I mean, showing up to, obviously you had Pareko and you had some NHL connections that, maybe made the transition a little easier, but showing up to St. Albert and having 100 eager, messy junior hockey players ready to play and drink quite a few beverages after. Like what was that like for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, the beer of choice was Corona. So, as an example,
Yeah.
down in St. Catharines, Welland in particular, they drink OV because they say you can't spell love without OV. But over in St. Albert at this event, Corona must have been a sponsor, or at least at the Canadian Brew House, they were pushing it
Yeah.
that night. And I remember I was like, ears were full of limes the next morning as I was trying to play hockey. And my D partner, Riley, was Nick Holden, who plays for Ottawa and is going to be kind of a mentor now to Jacob Chikrin, who they just acquired. And so he's my D partner, and I'm a little bit hungover, and I'm thinking, God, if I catch an edge and I wipe out a guy in the middle of he was playing for the Vegas Golden Knights at the time. It's big stuff, right? And Colton Pareko's over there, and it's just like, what am I into here? And Ian Mitchell, right? I blocked a shot by Ian Mitchell, who's now Chicago Blackhawks. But it was Tyler, once you're you and your brother, I mean, dressing rooms have a way of stripping away all of that rank and status and even anxiety. Like, my youth was filled with panic attacks, but only on the broadcasting side. It's incredible how many times I was refereeing a very important playoff game, and the anxiety wasn't there, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't figure out why I could not, be so calm on the ice when I was so scared when I was public speaking or on the radio or TV. And I attributed it to movement. I had a theory, my own little theory, because as you know, Riley, you don't talk about any of that stuff. I thought I was the only guy in the world who was experiencing what I was experiencing. But I felt so comfortable with your friends, Tyler. They were everything from NHL through, creme de la creme of junior or pro hockey. And we were all doing it for a reason I'll never forget. I put picture of the Broncos up on the wall in the dressing room the final day of the tournament. It was a 3-day affair. And to see these, rough and tumble guys come into the room sort of one at a time and just put their hand on that photo of the Broncos is the famous one of you guys on the boards. It was an easy place to feel great. Your family was great. Good times were had by all. And as you say, I saw a buddy who I have a friend who's going through the ringer, seems like for a long time. And he got to come out and be a part of that, sat with Tyler's mom and dad, and that was a highlight.
Yeah, that was, even still to this day. I mean, it's funny because we talk about how much fun it is, but it's also, I think for a lot of people, it's very competitive.
Oh, for sure.
And I think the lowest guys it's probably midget AA, junior B. So, I mean, where the benches are filled with 25 guys, but when you step onto the ice and you got to play against Parayko and Ian Mitchell and the countless just experience in the junior hockey ranks, it's so much fun. And, we're going to kick it off again this year. And once again, it should be a good one. But I just wanted to bring you on, Ron, because how much love and respect I have for you. And I know that, it's been a crazy couple of years. And Riley and I just read an article, the 55 Plus magazine, I believe was the name there.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
that's not like an age, like we're okay to be reading that. That wasn't like 55 plus, like, right?
When I was young,
accurate information.
The big goal when I was young, Riley, was they called it Freedom 55. It was I think an insurance program, but the idea was if you invested your money, you'd be home and cooled at 55, and you'd have a cottage, picket fence, Muskoka territory, the dream retirement, right? So that's probably why you two looked at it. But for me, sadly, it was because I'm a longtime member of the club.
But I want to start off, and I think it's a lot of obviously why you are the person you are today. It's somewhat stemmed from, I guess, the upbringing and being an only child in the military. So I really would like to hear just about that and about how, I read about how you moved around and how you're trying to integrate yourself into all these new situations and teams. Mm-hmm. And I mean, hockey was such a special part from the beginning, but I mean, just talk about even that, like the fact that you're always moving. And I know how much pressure it is nowadays, at least for youth that are always on the go. And I mean, new teams, new situations, new rinks. How was that for you? I mean, at a young age, you're constantly on the go and you're constantly trying to figure out kind of where you fit.
Well, as you know, you both have had nomadic lives in the game, and it's half exciting. Every time you have an opportunity, there's a bit of that, the excitement of seeing places, being and meeting new people. But of course, you're uprooted, and you're untethered. You lose your bearings a little bit. You lose whatever stock you'd built in terms of your ability to crack a joke or have an opinion. Those things are, everybody's sort of experiencing you for the first time, and it's like kind of, Riley, something you touched on right at the get-go with the series is that, this comes with me. And it's a very vulnerable feeling, which is a word, Tyler, you use all the time, is when you're meeting somebody and you're trying to be true to yourself. I'll tell you, Tyler, I've equated it a lot recently to kind of society. And what happened to me in broadcasting was when I was taught the business, I had a great mentor in Red Deer, Alberta, Wayne Barry. And Wayne taught me, Ron, you have to speak one-to-one. It's not hello, Canada, or hi, everybody. You speak one-to-one to the listener or the TV viewer, or if you're writing, to the reader. And you always try to relate one-to-one to someone like yourself. Someone with your ethics, your sense of humor, your sense of mischief. Because if you don't do that, you won't be authentic. But the problem has become, if I speak one-to-one to, this camera, how many people am I alienating with my sort of take on life? And no one used to call you on that. Now everybody can call you on that. So I had a real comeuppance through probably social media more than anything later in my life, which reminded me of the early days of moving around when I would feel, exposed or dangerous for, I'd started a new school, maybe grade 7, and I was kind of a yacky kid. I was an only child. So I think, and I needed to make friends. They were my extended family. But when you're that person, especially like in Western Canada, it was kind of a more buttoned down, quieter, I think, not to generalize or stereotype, but I feel like, Maritimers are legendary storytellers. I would say Albertans by, if I was to stereotype, which I'm doing, I shouldn't be, but are more of that hard worker that knows that, any moment now we could have torrential rain and wreck everything. So there's always a little bit on guard about a life on the prairies. That seems to imbue the way people act. So I was always, I lived in Whitehorse, Yukon. I lived in Nova Scotia, Mill Cove outside Halifax. I lived in Red Deer. I lived in Victoria. And these are all very different sort of, ways that I think, when you present yourself, you fit in. And it was a challenge, but I always use it as a great lesson or metaphor for tolerance, to really be accepting and welcoming, because I know what it was like to be the newcomer.
Yeah, I feel like that's like, it's almost like I think we align a lot in that. Like especially I think for me being on so many different teams
Right.
the last like 6 years, from one team to the next. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Like I need to be someone of like social connection, and I need to like feel like I can make these connections with all the different guys in the locker room. And it seems to me like, just from experiencing these moves, it's almost like I don't want to like you said, I don't want to stereotype this generation coming up, but it's almost like it's forgotten about a little bit, that ability to go out of your way to make somebody feel comfortable.
Right.
And to, like, when I look at like my best teammate I ever had is Sidney Crosby, and we all know like the how unbelievably talented he is, how good of a person he is. But to see that firsthand, a captain go out of his way to make a connection with player A, who's right behind him in the scoring on the score sheet, but then player B, who's the guy who's getting called up and sent down, and maybe doesn't have the voice in the locker room and doesn't have the confidence. I just see that as such a gift, and like no wonder Penguins have been such a good organization in the last 10, 15 years, And I just, for you being part of like the hockey media world and seeing it from a different perspective, like, do you kind of see that in players as you've interviewed them like over the past however many years? I'm saying.
Definitely. Well, let's talk about Crosby for a moment. So you obviously played with Brad Richards in Detroit, and only 1 year was Brad there, but it was a playoff year. Last time the Red Wings made the playoffs, and Brad. He told me that Sidney used to come to the Alan Andrews Hockey Academy in the Maritimes. Brad was already teaching as a 14-year-old. He was that good. And Crosby was 7 years younger, and he would come to the academy. And the only reason he wasn't teaching is that he was 7. He was so professional at the age of 7 in his approach to nutrition, in the way he dressed, in the way he acted with others. He said it was unbelievable. And they followed each other through the Rimouski Quebec Major Junior program. And I remember saying to Brad, well, Brad, you had 186 points in a season and Sid only had 168. And he said, well, Ron, he was 16 for God's sakes. He says, I was 18 when that happened. And Brad would tell, like, he had a golf tournament down in Prince Edward Island. Brad did, and I would go there, and it was just a shindig, and up all night. And I remember, Brad phoning a friend trying to find me. It was like 5 a.m. We were still at the St. James Gate, a bar, and we were supposed to get on a bus and go to the golf tournament. Terrible. But I get there, and I at least had done one good citizen thing. I had stuffed my golf bag with little teddy bears for the children. When I get there, imagine I'm half in the bag, so to speak, and I have all these teddy bears in my golf bag, and I'm handing them out, and there's a guy on the veranda of the clubhouse staring at me, and it's Sidney Crosby. It's his first time. He hasn't even played in the NHL yet, but he's now the number 1 draft pick of the Pittsburgh Penguins. So this is 2006, and he's staring at me, observing how am I dealing with the public. It was an incredible, and I could tell you can too, a million stories, Riley. So if you want to go on about Sid, but I remember Alan Andrews saying, when he was asked about Crosby being there at the golf tournament, he says, well, let me tell you, he's the only one here doing workouts in the afternoon. Yeah, I can tell you that. Yeah. And I'd see him at All Stars in the gym. I'd see him, he phones Bob Cole, you guys. Bob, our legendary play-by-play announcer, has been retired now for maybe 3 seasons. And start of the year or start of the playoffs, Sidney Crosby will jump on the telephone and call Bob, because they're Atlantic Canadians, and there's a connection there. And so you tell me, Riley, your favorite Crosby.
Well, even just recently, like I'm out in Switzerland now, and I mean I will text with him every once in a while, but I mean, you know how it is. You lose that like consistency of keeping in touch. And my coach came up to me the other day, and we've had a conversation about him because, he would ask me about like some culture things in the locker room about playing in the NHL and playing with this guy and playing with that guy. And Sid is always one guy that I bring up as being a very, very positive impact on me. And he just came up to me. We're going into playoffs in a week here. He came up to me. He's like, Riley, would you have any problem reaching out to Sid and maybe just getting him to send a video to wish our team luck and maybe just dive into some important details about what it takes to make it all the way and to stay consistent through playoffs and play through some tough games. And I thought about it, and if it's a different player, I probably would say, I'm not sure how I feel about asking a guy for that, but I just know what Sid's relationship is with me and with other guys, and just that feeling like he's giving and he's helping other people. And I said, sure, why not? So I texted him. I said, here's what they asked. Like, you mind sending a video? And sure enough, like they had their dad's trip. So he said, like, just give me a few days. We have our dad's trip and we'll be a little busy, but after that, I'll send you something. And sure enough, I didn't have to send him a reminder or anything. Just I get a video and it's perfect. Just talking about the details and the importance of staying together and all this stuff. That's just like, it's just like so powerful when you hear it from him too. So I'll send it on to my coach, and that'll be part of our pre-playoff meeting to get us going. And I mean, that's one. There's so many that I have, but yeah, I just wish that that could be shared with all of the hockey youth, because it's almost like that part of the game has been a bit forgotten about, and it's been very like skill based. How many points can I get? Because whatever I get will help the team win and things like that, but it doesn't always work that way. So that was one that stuck out for me, especially obviously it happened recently, and it's meant a lot, and I know will help our team.
At the All-Star this year in Fort Lauderdale, there was a skit during the skills competition where Alex Ovechkin brought his son, Sergei, out onto the ice, and Sidney Crosby was, because they were the, frickin' frack of promoting the game back in 2006 when they came into the NHL together. And so it was a very special moment to have Sid and Ovi there. And PK Subban is hosting both for Hockey Night in Canada and for ABC in the United States. And so the two guys signed this All-Star sweater. And then they go off and do a spoof 3-on-1 with the little kid, Sergei, scoring the goal. PK's wondering, what do I do with the sweater? So he just keeps it and puts it, with his stuff in a dressing room and takes it back to the hotel after the night. And at about 10:30, the phone rings, and it's Sid. And he wants the sweater for charity, right? And I got to tell you, this is so ironic we're talking about him, but I've had this sweater. It was all neatly folded. But it's a Sidney Crosby sweater from the Olympics in Vancouver in 2010. And it's a friend here in town, Oakville is where I live in Ontario. Gord Phippen is an educator. He got the sweater. He wore the sweater. It's not a game worn, but he wore it during the games. And he had this guy sign it, is the snowboarder who came through the Olympic rings as part of the opening ceremony to the Vancouver Olympic Games. He's from Cole Harbour, Vancouver. There's a Cole Harbour downtown in Vancouver where the Bayshore and other hotels are situated. And he thought, Gord, wouldn't it be neat if I have the snowboarder from Cole Harbour, Vancouver, and then on this shoulder, I'll get Sidney Crosby from Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia to sign it. And I haven't had the guts. I haven't had like you, Riley, I would never ask anybody for anything. It's kind of a contravention of professional working relationship, right? So one day when Sid retires, because I'll outlast him. No, it's not true. I'll get him to sign it, and he'll
I'm sure he'd do it in a heartbeat.
Of course, he'd do it in a heartbeat. But there's so many demands on, especially him and McDavid and those guys that. I just don't have the heart to ask yet. So maybe he'll be watching the podcast. And Brian Burke, I mean, I've got a million ways I could get to Sid. Rick Bowness, we go down. They live, McKinnon, Crosby and Rick Bowness live on the same lake outside of Halifax. And I know I'm out there at Rick's place, never at the, Star's place, but he's a gem. And to see his, obviously he would have experienced so much envy and lots of, he was in the crosshairs from the time, as I said, he was 7 years old, and him and Trina and Troy would deal with all that, and Taylor. And I think that's why he has that extremely accepting heart. He knows what it's like to be vilified for no good reason. He knows what it's like to have expectations thrust upon you to a level that's just unbearable, and that makes him, like Gretzky before him, when Wayne would put the Olympic teams together, Guy's going through a tough time. Pekka hasn't played in a year over a contract. He's on. Fleury's having trouble with substance abuse. He's on. Eric's having trouble with injury. He's on. That's Gretzky, and that's Crosby.
Yeah.
It is interesting how, I mean, even Sid with me, I mean, he's had such an amazing impact on me. I mean, I've only met him twice, I think, both with Colby, and same thing. I mean, I brought a hockey card and I brought my baby blue Winter Classic jersey, and I was so hesitant and reluctant to ask him to sign it. And of course, as we're about to leave after talking with Sid for, 30 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour, Colby is the one that's like, hey, are you gonna you gotta get it signed?
And I
was
should
like,
use Colby
I did
too.
come all this. Yeah, you know what? You should just send it down to Colby. Yeah,
Right.
But I actually this kind of brought up a weird little point. So I can't remember who I was with the other day, but ever since, I can't remember the exact experience, but Ron, you have such a keen eye on making sure that when you converse with somebody, even just at a fast food restaurant, a Starbucks, like just any sort of location, you'll read their name tag and you'll be able to, whether it's thank you, Michelle, whether it's how are you, Richard, you're so good at making sure that you're using their names. And for some reason that stuck with me. Even the other day I was at co-op and Michelle was the, attendant helping out. And I said, thank you, Michelle. And it's interesting because every time you use somebody's name like that, it's just like that instant moment where they're like, oh my gosh,
sure.
Thank you. And it's just something like that has just made me so much more appreciative of those small little relationships and those small little moments where Michelle could be having a really horrible day. And the fact that somebody was just able to use her name in this conversation could actually just uplift her. And I want to know, like, where did those little tendencies come with you? I mean, you talk about your empathy and you talk about having to move around and make sure that you're, immersing yourself in this new community and using names and all this. But where did those little small values and tendencies really, really stem from?
It's important to identify it as a value as opposed to a tendency or a habit born of some bargain that I'm trying to get something for myself by being this guy. I definitely think my parents, my mother in particular, she was the president of the CWL, the Catholic Women's League at the church, and she was one of those folks that people would be in our kitchen and talking to mom, and within a minute they were revealing their deepest, darkest secret. She had a great ear. She had a great sense of humor. She's definitely a lampshade at the party person. She had false teeth, a top plate. So she'd always be sticking them out and putting on foolish outfits she'd leave an elegant gathering that we were having in our home. She would leave, go down the hall, come back with her teeth out and a baseball sweater on and just like a complete goofus. And I loved that, the no pretense. She was huge on that. So had a very, maybe because they were military. I don't know. Both mom and dad were military, and mom had actually been in the convent before she joined the military, which is to become a nun. So she thought a lot about, the hierarchy of life and who gets to have certain status. And she wanted to strip all that away. And she always, she quit her job. She was working at Pittsburgh Paint and Glass, ironically, the name of the Penguins, Crosby's rink. Yeah, that's right. So she worked at that store in Red Deer, and they sold paint and they sold glass, mirrors and windows. And mom had really great command of the shop. And one day they were having an event, and the boss thanked a bunch of people but didn't thank her. And she quit. And it's mom, you who is so against status, and it was an impulse moment where she just walked out and felt disrespected. But I kind of admired her for doing that. She certainly wasn't going to save her job over. And she said, Ronnie, I shouldn't have done that. We need the money. We need the two jobs right now. And she would talk to me that way always. Like from the time I was 4 years old, she would relate to me about her temper tantrum that afternoon and just say, Ronnie, before you go to bed, I just was mad about this. It's nothing to do with you, nothing to do with dad. It's so she communicated on a level that was so incredible. And I remember Tyler also working in Red Deer at the Gulf. Gulf is a brand of oil, Gulf. doesn't exist in Canada anymore, but you still see it in the U.S. And I was in charge of the car wash. Not just me, but there were a few people worked the car wash. And, you had to, at the end of the evening, grease the chain that pulls the cars along, and you had to grease all of the nibs on all the rotating brushes and such. And it was quite a tedious cleanup. And but 1 minute, we'd always try to get a jump on that. But 10 to or quarter to, we'd start greasing and oiling everything so that we could get out of there right at 9 o'clock. And of course, at 1 minute to 9, one of the Western pickup trucks would arrive filled with shit in the back, whether it's straw or oil, and just make a complete disaster mess of the car wash. But you learned how the customers treated you, the car wash attendant. And I loved that job. And I felt like it was we were making each other's day all the time. And you see that with letter carriers. There's certain jobs you say hello to them, and Cindy is the one who takes care of our mail, and she's by every day loading the mailboxes here. And to know her and to be able to just say "Morning, Cindy" as I walk Jackson, my dog, it feels like it lifts us both for the rest of the day. So that's sort of the history of it, I think.
I actually read something the other day, and it talked about connection, and I think. For some reason, I feel that there is a lot of fear in connection now. I don't know if it's just nowadays and people want that kind of perfect formula on how to connect. Even I think, guys at the St. Albert tournament going up to you, like it can be intimidating at times to not ask for something, but just to connect. Right. And I read something the other day that detailed how there's no perfect way to connect. It's honestly just about being able to just the simple act of connecting is the first step. And I mean, I think that's obviously what your mom was so good at is, taking away that kind of fear with the connection aspect. And the fact that, same with, I could do my teeth too. And the fact that I could just take out my teeth and you make some sort of light of the situation and,
yes.
and bring out that humor aspect and bring out that comfortability and that authenticity that make people be like, that's what I needed. I needed to get that off. There was a weight on my shoulders for some reason, and now I can just connect and be myself.
I see it a lot in Kevin Bieksa, and he can do his teeth too. And, he has a lot of fun, just moments before air, once in a blue moon on the air. And he's got that mischief or that twinkle in his eye all the time that kind of cuts through all the importance of what we're supposed to be doing. And it's really helpful, but he lives in fear. I live in fear. Tyler, if we're at Enoch Cremation in the casino and doing push-ups after a few beers, that could be a video gone viral in 5 seconds. And it was a great time had by all we think. But I've been caught. I've done so many stupid things and being the clown and then realize, okay, Ron, you can't have your shirt off at the bar in Victoria at the Russ Courtnall Classic. Because first of all, you shouldn't have your shirt off publicly. Second of all, some people think that's really, insulting and threatening. And, I could list a million reasons why it's wrong. Didn't occur to me at the time. And so there again, balance, right? How to find, and I hate to live with those shackles. I hate what's become of society a little bit because of the, unforgiving nature of those who weren't, in the middle of that trust, not tryst, trust. You're always trying to establish these small circles of trust. And it's so hard to know where you've, as I said, back to that original point about me living my fullest Ron, might be without realizing it at the expense of someone else, just because of the joke I cracked or the way I behaved. And that's just, I don't know that I can solve that one. I think that one will get resolved well after I'm gone. I've read 1 billion books on ethics and on, on how to sort of, not rein yourself in, but to, like you hear a lot of the youth today say to be unapologetically themselves. And I say, well, it's a nice idea, but I hope you know to apologize when you're wrong, so I go back and forth.
I was kind of, before Ty asked that question, I was going to ask similar sort of thing, like how you've seen those values change, or if there has been a change, especially in the hockey world or in the sports world. Like, is there more of an openness you'd like to see from players? As it's kind of like getting off track, but I guess just like being someone who engages a lot with the players, is there an openness you would like to see more from
I'm torn. You tell me, Riley, but I am always torn on this idea of, show more personality, show more of yourself.
Exactly to what you were just saying too, because it's hard for guys to show personality when there's critics that are going to
Right.
critique everything that they say, right? So that's kind of
Or
where my question's
opponents,
stemming
or
from.
opponents that will,
Yeah.
use it as fuel or fodder. I think those are complexities within that whole dialogue. I still, for all I love about, the art of loving oneself, and that's in the end, that is what it's about: is to accept your own warts and to find peace and love in, the way you're trying to do things. But you always have to have an eye on the other, to consider the other person. That's back to your point about, what does it take to create a culture in the room? How does Crosby immediately take his nearest rival in the scoring race and make that person comfortable? How does he take the fourth line? Gretzky was always good at this as well. He couldn't coach because he couldn't make the fourth liner valued the way he could as a player. As a player, he could have them at the bar with him, share stories. Everything seemed even. But as a coach, now you're delegating ice time. He really struggled with that whole element. And I think, for the growing up into the game today, we were after beer league hockey last night. We were sitting at the Fire Halls, a bar in Oakville, talking about there's a expose right now on the GTHL, which is the Greater Toronto Hockey League, and how all the parents, the kid didn't make it. Well, not a problem. I'll buy the team. and they own all the parents own the teams, and they were sort of saying that it's very much monetized, the treatment of young players, and when you get into money as sort of the guiding principle, well, that'll shut down personality quicker than a heartbeat, because you can't dare to risk a customer or risk your investment with behavior. So I think that's what's happening a little bit. And one of the reasons that it's become so, tough for people to be themselves. But I was saying to the gang after they all have kids in minor hockey right now, and they all see the problems. I said, well, for me, moving around, it was the cliques that I couldn't penetrate that frustrated me. I would leave Whitehorse, Yukon, and show up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and team was set. All the parents, they drank together that year. Still parental intervention, but those are the problems that prepared me for the tough times I've experienced in my career, which could be saying the wrong thing on TV and ending up on the front page of the Globe and Mail or the national news. I do feel that it's okay that life is a bit unfair, because life is unfair, and we need a little bit of that seasoning and skin thickening to get us through, I think.
Yeah.
And skin thickening, being in your position, there is inevitable anxiety that's going to come with that. But obviously in this article, you detail that a little bit more. I think it'd be wrong to not talk about Hockey Night in Canada, your first time. I think anybody would just be, it just would bring a lot of joy to a lot of people, because Hockey Night has brought so much joy to a lot of people over the years. So talk about that. Talk about how you're able to, you detail that anxiety from 17 years old to 37 years old. Obviously, there's still anxiety, but those were the major years of your life where that anxiety was debilitating at times, with panic attacks and, losing your breath and your heart racing. Talk about that first time on Hockey Night in Canada.
Well, I remember just before going to air, there was a producer. His name was Doug Sellers, and Doug said, Ron, we liked your work hosting the Flames games in Calgary. You do a fine job, but you have one affectation we'd like you to work on. When you're interviewing guests, your eyes are flitty. They're up and down and all around, and it's disconcerting to the viewer. So if you could try to hold your eye contact when you're doing an interview with a guest. Now, my guest is Don Cherry, so it doesn't get any bigger. And I remember riveting my eyes on his, and within a second, my left eye started to water. I was so self-conscious about my wandering eyes. And luckily, the tear wasn't visible on TV because the camera's over here. But I knew it was happening, and Grapes is looking at me thinking, good God, is this kid going to bawl every time I say I like fighting? And it was the beginning of a meltdown, right? And I luckily, I had no panic attack in that one. I was just more like mad at myself. And we all know, I hate this too, about the crazy dichotomies, is that the easiest solution to your anxiety is anger. If you're in a mad state, chances are you're not going to have that loving, vulnerability. But anyway, Grapes kind of kept rambling as he does, and that bought me time, and I got through the thing. But I expected literally to wake up the next day and see in the Toronto Sun newspaper, young host, melts down like Albert Brooks in Broadcast News, a movie. Nobody noticed, and I got through that. But I had so many times, like I did the second NHL awards in 1995. My first was in 1994. It went fine. And I always remember Patrick Roy saying that the encore performance is the toughest. Once you do one thing well, so then I don't know if it's a letdown or if it's expectation. There's a million things could contribute to why the second time is always harder than the maiden run. And I came onto the stage, a big drum roll, and now your host, Ron MacLean. It's like, for Christ's sake, I'm from Red Deer, Alberta. What the hell is happening here? And I started to have a panic attack, and I could feel it coming on, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm on stage now for the next 6-7 minutes. This is a monologue. This is supposed to be me telling jokes, and I'm coming undone. And there was I always remember this too, the little things that can save you. They had pyro, and a spark from like a little cinder of paper came and landed right at my eye, which kind of broke me of that beginning of the anxiety attack. And then I cracked a joke, which was crummy, about Brian Burke. And I remember my mother was really mortified at that joke. It was nothing, vulgar, but it was just smart alecky. And she hated. I said to Kyle Bukoskis' parents, we did hometown hockey in his hometown, Campbell River, BC, last year. And I was saying to his mom, do you ever, sit and watch Kyle and get angry at something he's done? Angry at Kyle? And yeah. Good point. He's not the smart aleck I am. And I felt stupid for asking that question. But my mom would call me on that stuff all the time. Ron, I'd like to smack you for, you're thinking you're somebody. So she was always keeping me in line. She was pushing me and promoting me and having those lovely heart-to-hearts. And then she'd say, okay, enough, Ronnie, you're getting carried away with yourself. So, which is good balance. We need that kind of coaching. But yeah, that was all through Hockey Night in Canada. Tyler, I fell into it at the beginning. It was just sort of Dave Hodge was moving on in his career, and I was like the backup goalie thrust in. Didn't have too much time to think. And we all know time to think is what is the enemy. When you can dwell, if you have that idle moment, you can really go down a rabbit hole if you're not careful. So Judy Rankin, golfer, I worked with her on golf. She used to say, I got to be busy. I can't dwell. And I think she's right.
What did you do to keep yourself going through that span of this pressure?
Let me go back, Riley, because when I started, the worst panic attack I ever had was and it was kind of the career defining moment for me when I was about, I'd say 19 years old. I was a disc jockey in Red Deer, and our job, the disc jockeys who did the weekday shows, was to go out on weekends and do what were called on locations. We would be at Festival Ford, and we would come on 4 times an hour for 60 seconds, mentioning all the sales they had at Festival Ford that day. And I was at a stereo shop on the North Hill in Red Deer, and my job was to push Panasonic stereos and so on. And I heard the DJ building up to, and now we're heading on up to the North Hill, and Ron MacLean is with us today. Ron, what's happening at Stereo Shop? And I had started, and I started to talk, and I could feel my words running away and running out. And eventually at about the 15-second mark of my little spiel, I had to stop. And my heart was gone. And the owner of the store is looking at me thinking, what is going on here? And I hear the DJ back at the plant at CKRD saying, Ron, where are you there? Well, we seem to have a technical problem. We'll get back to Ron in just a moment. Here's Fleetwood Mac, Dream. And I just remember I had 14 minutes to gather myself for the next time I was going to go on. And I was still feeling extremely unsettled. And I said to myself, well, this is it. This is your career right here, bub. If you don't somehow fight your way through that next 60-second hit, you're done. This is not the career path for you. And I somehow willed my way through that one. And in the case of the NHL awards, by that time, so that I would say when I was 19 would have been 1979. By the time the NHL awards meltdown happened, it's 95. So we're talking 16 years later. By that time, I had some coping methods. I knew, to crack a joke was one, to get breathing time, have the audience hopefully laugh, and that would buy me some time. And I knew I could fight my way through. By then, I understood how to keep going, just keep going. And then eventually, I learned to get out of myself, as I've often said, and start thinking about why are we here tonight? It's to honor the best players in the NHL this year. It's to honor the game. It's not about you, Ron, being Johnny Carson or David Letterman. But that's a hard lesson, right? That takes you have to prove yourself. Riley, it's like your career. You're constantly having to fight for your turf, and in that mode, in that fighting for your turf mode, your mental health can really be an enemy.
That's the worst.
Yeah.
And it's funny how like it goes hand in hand with, it doesn't matter your career. Like the experiences are so similar. Like when you talk about that, like I've had the same thing with like panic. All of a sudden I'm walking out the locker room for the game to start and it just hits me. And then I get on the bench and it's like, you don't even remember the first period. And then you get back, it kind of just goes away. But like for me, I always went back to like, as a coping mechanism, like you said, like, well, like remember what 10-year-old Riley would think about this situation right now. And I think that's a really good one for hockey players, because the love of the game changes from when you're that age to when you start to become a regular NHLer. Totally changes. It becomes more of a job, and you really have to think about why you're playing, and you have to do it a lot. I know for me, like to stay playing and to even make the decision to come out to Switzerland, I have to remember why I'm doing it and ask myself that question a lot. So, but I think it can be a question for you. Like when you were going through these, you had these hiccups, and I'm sure you had many more throughout your career. Like, were there times where you're thinking like, maybe it's easier for me to just kind of taper my way out, be done, and you start thinking about how much easier it would be on the other side of just having a quieter schedule and things like that?
Jan Arden has a song, and I can't think of the title of it, but it's basically the gist of the song is, I want to run away where nobody knows my name. And I always kind of love that. It's like Freedom 55, this dream of retirement when you're 55 years old. But she was having trouble with alcohol. So she said that I wrote that when I was in that period of fighting this, whatever it is I was fighting. And then when I got through my, drinking, and I suddenly saw opportunity in a TV show at CTV and a magazine, doing a column, and instead of running away from everything, I started running towards things. And I thought, oh, good for you. Maybe I got to give up drinking. But I don't. And I love the good times, and the, beer after the game is just so ingrained that I just can't imagine life without it. But I on my beer league hockey team, I have Anglican ministers. I have some really interesting people, and they talk and they deal a lot with substance abuse, and they kind of point selfishness as kind of a factor in why we go down that path, and they sort of explain to me that you'll still be selfish after you're clean and sober. So there's, again, I'm rationalizing, and I do this for a living in my own world. But I think about Jan all the time, and I think about Riley, that, peace, I'm out. And I had so would love to be there. But I also don't want to quit on, like, I really enjoy Kevin Bieksa now coming in. And I was watching him the other night. His son, Cole, was in a state tournament, and they lost 3-1 in the final. And Kevin, he was so distracted. He wasn't even watching Hockey Night in Canada games. And so the game ends, and, he doesn't throw he's one of the coaches, and he puts the phone down, and I says, how'd they do? They lost 3-1, empty netter. And he said, but it was a good year. I told him, this was a great year. I always remember, getting sidetracked here, but Rick Binns was a coach when I refereed, and he was with the Milton Merchants, they were called. Ice Hawks and Merchants. They had two different names over the time I refereed Milton. John Tavares played for them.
I remember the Ice Hawks. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were in the finals for the Sutherland Cup against Kitchener Dutchman. And it's best of 7, goes down to the deciding game. And they are trailing 6-0 after 2, which can happen. In the 7th game, sometimes they just go right out the window on you. And that's what happened to Milton that night. And Rick, the coach, said to the guys, he says, now you can go out and score 6 if you want. But let's say we don't. We are not going to delete the year we had by embarrassing ourselves. You guys have had an incredible year, and we're an incredible group. So let's not embarrass ourselves, guys. And he walked out. And it was just such a beautiful thing to say to a group of 16 to 20-year-olds. And watching Kevin work with his son in that program and our program, and so that's kind of what keeps me going. I feel like whether I'm first line, fourth line on that Hockey Night team, because I do feel like good God, it's, I'll be 63 in a month. It is time for David Amber or Carolyn Cameron or Kyle Bukoskis, pick your, poison.
What about even when you were like at a younger age too? Like,
for sure, happened.
You
it
said
happened
like,
when I was 17 years in. I kind of used Pekka as my inspiration. I got into a contract squabble with the CBC in 2002, so I was 42 years old, 20 years ago, 21, and I remember I was fully prepared to move on. I don't know what the hell I thought I was going to do with my life. And this rally, I'll never, I don't want to attribute it to anything other than luck, but so many times I've been where I should have been gone. George Strombolopoulos taking over, or that contract squabble in 2002. And it's, the writing's been on the wall so many times. And I hear it on social media, that I'm a Teflon because I must be, somehow forsaking my principles to keep my job, which couldn't be further from the truth. But it seems that way. Like I seem to be so fortunate to always be the one left standing, and I hate that when it's at the expense of others who've lost their careers. Yeah. But in my case, I think you have to have a little bit, like when I refereed, Riley, one of my heroes was a guy named Bill Clem, and he was an American League umpire in Major League Baseball. Maybe National League umpire. It doesn't matter. He was a Major League Baseball umpire. And his line to his, students who wanted to be umpires was, number one, don't sell your soul, save your soul. And number two, if they can have your job, you don't want the job anyway. And that's a great way to look at it. If they could have your job, you don't want the job. So as long as they want you, you're good to keep playing and good to keep broadcasting.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That was, I have so many, once again, so many thoughts running through my mind. And it's funny, you talk about Kyle Bukoskis and his parents, and I'm never getting mad at him. My parents don't get mad at me, but it was funny a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, I do my fair share of podcasts and speaking. And yes, the hockey terminology comes in with the likes and obviously's and no doubts and all that. And I remember my mom called me and she's like, you should really watch the likes. And then I kid you not, probably, I can't remember if it was that same day or the next day, my dad's like, yeah, you should really watch the likes. And then I get a FaceTime from my parents that night being like, we're sorry. Like, we didn't mean to come at you like that. Yeah. But no, it's funny because and then the humor side of things, I have a little bit that I do at the start of my speaking engagements now, where I'll read a quote and then I'll do the classic for anybody that ever wants me to speak. I hope I don't ruin the joke, but I'll read this quote about authenticity, and it's about a 2-minute quote, and then I'll look at the crowd and be like, well, that was my speech. Thank you very much for having me. We'll see you again. And I did it to a adult crowd, loved it. I was like, this is good. They're all laughing. I later did it to a high school crowd. You could hear a pin drop. And I was like, hey, well, I gotta now rework my situation a little bit. But to kind of go off that, and, Riley asking you, do you sometimes just think, I just want to kind of be a regular dude and I just want to, I actually recently, right before Christmas, I looked at Kat and I was like, I'm done. I can't keep speaking. Like I can't keep waiting for the next speech. I just want to be a 9-to-5 guy. I just want to go out there. And then I don't know what it is, but continually there's that small little ounce of motivation, and you've seen it and you've felt it, and you've done a lot of hometown hockeys. And I look at the families of the 16 amazing families. I see the foundations. I see the scholarships. I see Green Shirt Day with Boulay. I see the Logan Boulay effect. I see all these amazing things that these families are doing, and these families that have been through what I hope nobody goes through. And the fact that they're still able to push through this adversity and push through this resilience and just keep going and to keep these legacies alive. And I think that's exactly what I attach to. And it's funny how you attach to something when you think you want something, but it always comes back. And I did a speech up in Timmins, Ontario, and Kirkland Lake, Ontario, and I'm in Brunswick House First Nation. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing? Why am I across the nation speaking about this and speaking about my journey? I was recently in a room with Hunter Ryan Singh accepting the Queen Elizabeth Platinum Jubilee Medal. And I'm thinking to myself, there's people in this room who deserve this. There's people who have an impact on communities. Like, what am I doing? And it's so weird how we self-sabotage ourselves when we are actually doing a lot of good. We are making an impact. And sometimes it could be a very small impact, a very small, minute impact that might change somebody's life. But it's interesting how, as humans, we're so quick to diminish our own stories and so quick to self-sabotage, because that's the easy route.
I don't know that you're
Go ahead, Ron.
self-sabotaging, Tyler. I think it's hard what you do. You're putting yourself out there. You're suddenly representing the team and all the different situations of the 13 survivors. It's not easy. It's kind of like a trigger that you relive. And I've heard this from I did for 10 years. I was the honorary chairman of the Canadian Paraplegic Association. So that's spinal cord injury. Those who've had spinal cord injury and are paralyzed. And I would go to all the rehab centers, which is, that was hard, but I did it in a way for the staff who are, relentless in the great work that they do. You know what it was like to be at Royal University in Saskatoon. Just remember it's hard to believe. I always describe it as a paradise built in hell. It made no sense that Grace Cameron and Tyler was out, but some of the moments I had right there with the staff, with the team, it's magic, but it's work. So with that spinal cord injury situation, the only real person of importance is a peer counselor, someone who's been similarly paralyzed and will now deal with the patient. And that is something that person who survived their crash, maybe 25 years ago, they're still doing. They're still kind of reliving their injury, teaching someone how to, get back in with society and integrate themselves in a new situation. So that's a big burden. Same with alcohol and drug abuse. Derek Sanderson, ADAC is his program, and he'd say to me, in a quiet moment, that's a long time that I've had to kind of do this same thing, so it comes with that it comes with all of this weight that you have to be like being an ER doctor. You succeed sometimes, you don't always succeed, and you're doing it with such noble intention, and you feel such kind of a important weight to get it right. So that's why you want to run. And that's why Riley says, wouldn't you want to run? And yes, the answer is yes, of course. There's times when I just think, God, how am I going to say big game tonight and do justice to International Women's Day? Or how am I going to do justice to, obviously deflect to, in the case of our show, Jennifer Botterill. But whenever you get into those, what are now being labeled woke, ethical agendas, it's tremendous responsibility to get it right, and it's very hard to get it right. Alienate
and
your
you talk about authenticity too a lot.
Yes,
Ron? That's another hard piece too. Like I find it hard, like when Ty and I are doing the podcast, like the last thing I want is anybody to think that we're doing this, or like maybe more personal for me doing this to like get something out of it, or to like have that the message that I'm saying be like cheesy, or like these are the thoughts that go through my head, that I'm like jumping on the bandwagon of like a Kevin Love in a more lesser role, obviously, or like one of these athletes that's just coming out to talk about it, to get some, like all these thoughts just kind of
course
bombard you. But like we really try to put an effort in to just talk casually about it, just so people know it's normal.
Well,
that authenticity part is hard.
Riley, when we're in a situation where we are scared or we are worried, concerned, vulnerable, we usually seek out this kind of thing. So it's such a valuable. That's why there are peer counselors in a spinal cord injury rehab center. That's why there are sponsors, they call them, in say Alcoholics Anonymous. Those figures in society are such heroes because we need. We are looking for that lifeline, and this kind of an idea becomes that. And you're right, it's never about preaching either. It's just about explaining as Tyler's t-shirt, we're not alone, or you're not alone. That's all you're really doing, and it's extremely important, because there's whether we didn't know it when we were young, there are so many folks who are similarly impacted and wanting somebody to sort of. That's why books, over the early course of history, all the great writers, whether it's Cervantes or Shakespeare, they were basically dealing with the narrative, the human condition, all our foibles. And Hamlet, as an example, in Shakespeare, he dies of thinking too well. That's why he perishes. He basically dwells himself to death. And it's good to know that happens to, people in royal positions. So he was.
I've been trying to get on the reading. I've been doing a lot better at reading, and I've just been. I mentioned to Ty the other day, actually. Would you have ever? You probably wouldn't have ever crossed paths with Mitch Albom.
Of course, I have.
He's a sports writer. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Tuesdays with Maury, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just was because I know he's a sports writer too. So I was wondering maybe if you guys have ever crossed paths. But I told Ty about Tuesdays with Maury's, and then the five people you meet in heaven. And like when I was younger, I never would have read a book that had heaven in the title because I never would have had that connection with spirituality and any of this stuff. But it's like you have so many like light bulb moments go off when you read these kinds of books that are bigger than you and bigger than us. So those were two that just hit me really hard the last like maybe month or so. So I'm glad to hear that you've heard of those or fan of those.
Yeah, he's incredible. Used to be on talk shows with him, and one of the things I always say about whether you're a referee or a broadcaster, you have people who are loved in your care. We're kind of like a version of the legal system, and say what we will about the legal system, it's always going to have its issues, but at core, it's the greatest next to some kind of a heaven, and some kind of a religious caretaker. The courts, the policing, the judiciary, the Supreme Court, these are the folks who set out the fair treatment policies. And that's, when they've got somebody on death row, that person has parents, or that person has siblings, or that person has someone who loves them. And so I always frame it that way. We have people who are loved in our care. And it's just vital when you do this kind of work. Like Mitch is probably one of the greatest examples of just he is the personification of that ideal. He always thinks about you, and he loves you. So it's a crazy, a little bit wordy way of saying that he's really great at what he does.
Okay, so we talk about authenticity.
We'll have to get you reading those.
Yeah,
I know. I need to get in that. But we talk about authenticity, and it's funny because the quote I read at the start of my speaking engagements is actually purely on authenticity. And I'm a huge quotes guy now. I tell it to a million people, and I have to read this for you, Ron, because I think you will 100% relate to this. So it's just random. I can't remember what book it was from. My friend one day just sent me it, and just like out of the blue, he was like, I think you'd like this. Authenticity is the daily practice of letting go who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Choosing authenticity means 1, cultivating the courage to be imperfect, to set boundaries, and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. 2, exercising the compassion that comes from knowing that we are all made of strength and struggle. And 3, nurturing the connection and sense of belonging that can only happen when we believe that we are enough. Authenticity demands wholehearted living and loving, even when it's hard, even when we're wrestling with the shame and fear of not being good enough, and especially when the joy is so intense that we're afraid to let ourselves feel it. I don't know what it is about that quote, and I think it perfectly encapsulates. I mean, I probably have a biased view of you, Ron, because of the way that you've been a part of our community, and that's a special thing. And we talk about community a lot, and you talk about community a lot. I want to know, hometown hockey was such an amazing thing for you. Obviously, losing that connection, it can't be an easy thing. You've made these connections and you have roots in a lot of these places, and you're always able to remember those stories and be present and remind yourself of those fond memories. How has that kind of loss of connection been for you? I know that, you do talk about connection a lot, and I know that it was tough losing Tara. And I mean, I'm glad to see that Tara's doing really well down in California now and starting her podcast and doing amazing work. What has that been like for you? Because I mean, I'd imagine even when hometown hockey started, that's a different adventure, and that's a different endeavor that, requires a lot of traveling after a Saturday hockey night in Canada and going to these random new places that maybe you've never been. But what was that like for you to lose that not lose it, because that connection's always going to be there, but not
Right.
being able to, I guess, identify those new connections that make you learn so much about these small communities and these unique individuals.
Well, that's one of the, we're not good at endings, whether it's a relationship ending or a loved one's life ending or a career ending. That's one of the biggest things that, your personal next. What is it going to be? And you, if you can deal with that, that's a really important tool to have in your toolbox. Tara just sent a text 2 days ago of a little restaurant in the Vancouver airport. There's a kind of an Asian food noodles place that we would always have our meals at when we were coming back from Williams Lake or Prince Rupert or Prince George or on and on and on. And it was just such a simple photo of, memories of sitting at that airport eating. That I miss that. Our crew, Tyler was absolutely incredible. When we were rallying in Leduc, Tyler's hometown, we were at a Barney's, had a beer wall. I'd never heard of a beer wall. You get a little credit card and you go and put the credit card in the slot and you can pour any tap you want of beer, and it registers how much you've consumed, and so there's no waiting around for a waitress, so it's trouble because you can fill your glass 52 times in 12 minutes. But we had those moments all across the country. I ate caribou heart in Thompson, Manitoba. I ate seal burgers in St. John's, Newfoundland at Mallard Cottage. The experiences we shared, the nights, Kurt Bensmiller is a great chuck wagon driver from Dewberry, Alberta, but we were staging hometown hockey nearby in Lloydminster, and he came out with us and did karaoke, and we were, shirts off at I don't know what hour. It was I don't think Kurt would have had his shirt off, but I know I did. And, that was all part of the foolishness that, made you alive and made you together and bonding. And then Dee Hambley, one of our producers, would say, Ron, that can't happen again. So it was just, we supported each other like a team. We were really a traveling team. And I know from my youth how important it was when, players would come to our small centers and make the NHL a firsthand experience, because for most of it's just a TV. It's an impossibility. Yeah. Riley, you made it. It's an unbelievable thing to do, and to play as long as you did is an unbelievable thing to do. But that is not most folks who love the game's reality. But you Tyler, to go back to your question, yeah, I always think about what is next. I'll dig my self into that with everything I have, and that ethic is what you just maintain, and you have to, impermanence is all the, Buddha teachings are about, acceptance of impermanence. We're not going to live forever. Things are not going to stay the same forever. So the more you work at trying to become comfortable with that, the better you are taking on a new challenge when something comes to an end. But I miss Battle of the Blades same way, Tyler. It was Kurt Browning. It was a whole figure skating group that I, never dreamt that I would be so smitten with figure skating and the art of it. And Kurt Browning is from central Alberta, where I grew up, Caroline, Alberta, where the Vandermeers, one of the toughest families of hockey, grew up. And anyway, he's a great figure skater, 4-time world champion. And he and I would create a little skit to start the telecast, and then we'd take it to Sandra Bezic, who's a creme de la creme of choreographers, and she'd say, "Oh God, not a chance, you two. That is so beneath you two." And we'd say, "What? We thought it was funny." And she had an eye for art that was completely different than two hockey kids from central Alberta. So it was a great experience to see the figure skaters and hockey players, normally dread enemies, collaborate. And hometown hockey was that kind of, Tara, of course, to have a female lead on a NHL broadcast, and she is full of ethics, right? She's just right down your throat with what is just and what is right, and don't you forget it. And it was a joy to experience that strength. I called her the ethical canary, because she would just call anybody BS on improper language, improper conduct. One of the, just as an aside, I've always said the three most amazing things that I've experienced in my life, places on earth where I felt the earth move when I stood there because of the history. One was Luzhniki Ice Palace in Moscow, where Paul Henderson scored in 1972. To stand in the crease on the ice at that rink, Calgary Flames were there doing a tour in '89. That was unbelievable. To be on Cape Canaveral, Launchpad 39A, where the lunar landing, these are things before your time, but 1969, we put a man on the moon, and that was a big deal. Like I was 9, to see this frickin' thing, the Eagle, a little spaceship, land on the moon, and Neil Armstrong step out, and one giant step for mankind. And unbelievable thing. So when I was at Cape Canaveral and stood on the launch pad, and then the other one is Rogers Place in Edmonton. I was standing at center ice with Tara Sloan before an Oil Kings game for Rogers Hometown Hockey, and Luke Prokop, the openly gay hockey player, was standing there, number 6, big, 6'4" defenseman. And I thought, oh, good for you. Like what you did is I put on par with Henderson and Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. And it was just I didn't expect to feel it that way. I don't know why I felt it that way, but I just was absolutely awash with admiration for Luke that day. And it's one of my favorite things. So I miss it, hometown hockey. It gave us that.
Yeah. Yeah. We had the pleasure of having Luke on, and
good.
What he's done, and it's crazy. It always comes down to connection for us and conversation, and there's so much value in your relationships and your conversations that you have in your life, and like Riley said it perfectly. I mean, there is fear going into these conversations at times, but then again, coming out on the other side after an hour of talking to sometimes a person that we have truly no immediate connection to, but being able to take so much from their perspective is a very profound thing, and it's something that I really never anticipated doing. But there is a lot of hope that Riley and I think we both have. Same with the Not Alone, our clothing line. There is a lot of hope that those small little pieces and those small little quotes will stick with somebody, and they will go home and take that with them into a conversation that they later have in their day-to-day life. And it's Ron, I mean, I mean, this is always a joy for me, and I know that this is probably something that Riley was looking forward to as well. But I mean, I can't thank you enough, and you are continually a wealth of knowledge. And I want to mention one: where shall wisdom be found? How does that? That lights you up.
Let me tell the viewer that one. So, Where Shall Wisdom Be Found is a book by Harold Bloom, who's a Shakespeare critic, but he's also a literature expert, knows all writers of all time, and he wrote a book on wisdom. Where Shall Wisdom Be Found? And in the book, he compares various, like the first chapter is Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. He'll compare him to Plato, let's say. And then the second or third chapter is Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote, Spanish writer or novelist, the first great novelist, and Shakespeare. He compares those two and how they did their thing. And how they did their thing was to have conversation. In the case of Cervantes and the book Don Quixote, it was Don Quixote's a retired school teacher who wants to be a knight. He wants to go out and do good deeds. And they hook him up with a farmer, a peasant farmer named Sancho Panza. And they go out and do all these attempts at good deeds, and it's always a disaster. And then they debrief. And in the debrief, this educator, who's kind of lost his marbles, but has all this wisdom in him from academia, combined with the peasant farmer who has all the street smarts in the world, the conversations are off the charts illuminating. It's, you get to the real kernels of what makes society and humanity tick. That's one. And then Shakespeare on the other side, he was doing exact same time. He was doing the same thing with, like Hamlet. He had a valet named Falstaff. So Hamlet goes on to become king, and Prince Hal at the time, and they are back and forth, arguing about different things and how they should approach speeches. And where shall wisdom be found? It's in conversation. So that's the moral of that story, and why Tyler brought that. I mean, Tyler, I don't know if you can see.
Something right, Tyler.
Yeah, there. Where's my? I can't even find my finger here. Over there is your Not Alone shaving kit. Can you see it? It's up on the shelf.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, a constant reminder. Yeah, that's amazing, Ron. Riley, you got anything else?
No, I mean, this was great. I don't know, Ty, I think I might have shared this story before, but even when we were talking about like that reminder of like why you play the game, and when I think about when I was younger, I mean, your voice is definitely one that comes to mind. And I remember one of the pictures that I paint in my head is when I was at the age where I wasn't old enough to stay up late enough to watch a complete Leaf game on Saturday night. I remember laying at the landing of our staircase, looking through like our banister, watching my dad watch Hockey Night in Canada, and you guys would come on in intermission. So it's definitely a nostalgic piece for me, and you and Don come to mind when I think about why I still play and that feeling I would get when I was younger. So this is really exciting for me, and Ty and I know we both appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, well, thank you, Riley, and good luck. Are you in playoffs now? Have they started? Or
I'm in Montreux, Switzerland. I don't know if you've ever heard that. But we're on a little vacation right now before playoffs start. It's a little bit
Right.
different lifestyle over here with the schedule and things like that. We get a lot of breaks, which is nice, but we'll start Wednesday. So
That's like me without hometown hockey. I have a lot of breaks, so it's good. I think it's good for the body. And Tyler, I can't wait to see. I'll try to get out to the tournament. I got a couple of Alberta commitments already. So
Well, you better let me know.
yeah, I know. You must need a 63-year-old right defenseman. Although I'm a lefty, I'm too old. I'm playing the wrong side, and I have limes coming out of my nose and my ears after the Canadian Brew House. Otherwise, I'm
the locker room guy.
Yeah, I'm a glue guy.
Exactly. Yeah, Ron. I mean, as always, my family has so much love for you.
Yeah, same.
We have so much love for you, and yes, say hi to your partner. Say hi to Bieksa when you see him again, because that guy is he's a hoot. He's fun to watch. But as always, keep doing what you're doing, and keep being you. This was once again a very authentic and genuine conversation that I think we all really enjoyed. And you bring a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of wisdom, but also just a wealth of relatability, and it's something that can't be matched. So yeah, man.
Thank you. Lots of love.